Who am I?
Richard Kazimer, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Kazimer in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Kazimer.
Good morning, good morning. Do you know what? We've found our friend Richard. We're trying to catch him in there in the US of A. And he's online right now. How are you, Richard?
Doing fine, John. How are you, sir?
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm doing awfully well.
Did you get the international code figured out? What was the problem?
Yeah, well, I don't know what the problem was. I think I was too many noughts and the telephone got naughty. What's been happening in the States? I understand there's been some well-trained Iraqis and a few soldiers too providing the right kind of questions and compliments to your president.
That fiasco is now going to be the replacement sitcom for the new shows that have been canceled already after a couple of weeks. That whole thing was such a joke. This second administration with Bush is just such a house of cards and a comedy of errors. And for them to be doing this with it on the satellite and the press corps sitting there watching the prepping of these soldiers who were sitting there in Tikrit that looked like they were making a hostage tape. It was hilarious. This administration cannot do anything right, and it's a hoot. It's a hoot.
But surely, though, as soon as you get one of these situations, we all know that the people have been specially picked, and we all know they've been briefed. It's not any surprise. You suddenly get the president talking to a couple of soldiers. What do we think is going to happen? I mean, we've all watched MASH. We know what goes on.
But, John, that's the problem, though. Why should it be? I mean, why should we be so trained to expect that our leaders are such incompetent twits? That doesn't say much for the guy who ran and said, I am your leader, I'm going to make some changes, and then you find out, well, the guy's a total moron. There's a huge rumor going around here in the press and otherwise that he's back on the blow, he's back on the bottle. People are checking out every time he's on the air the blotches on his face and then tracing it to medication that he'd be taking for alcoholism and drug abuse. Certainly his speech pattern proves it, but it's crazy.
Something else I don't understand is how did he get voted in? Because we hear these stories about the elections not going through, and it shouldn't have been the case, and yet it still took place. Are there still some legal minds scratching their heads over that?
Absolutely. Our voting system here is very strange, and I can't even explain it. We have a thing called the Electoral College, which each state has a number of electoral votes based on the number of congresspeople and senators that they have, plus 2. So the larger states have more electoral votes than some of the smaller states, and that's when you see campaigns going on. That's where the candidates hit first. It's not one vote, one person. Someone can theoretically win the popular vote, but the opposition can win the electoral vote, and that person who wins the electoral vote wins the election. There were some things, again, in Florida, which was questionable during his first campaign, where polls were shut down prior to the closing hours. People were not allowed to vote. And the same thing in Ohio. It's unbelievable. But once the guy gets in, once whoever wins the election, then it becomes a moot point, and nobody bothers to do anything about it. When John Kerry conceded, well, that's it. It's done. It's done until
now, if he hadn't have
2006.
actually conceded, what would have happened then?
If he didn't concede, then the Democratic Party would have had to come up with a lot of money to challenge it and drag it through the courts. And in the meantime, there's always this stigma that the country is in peril that because they don't have a leader. And what does that say to the rest of the world, that we're weak? It's a bunch of crap. So it's better off for the loser to say, okay, you know what? I lost. I conceded. But I told you so, and you watch what happens in the next 4 years, and that's exactly what's happening. John Kerry and the Democratic Party, except for Howard Dean, are too good to say, I told you so, but now, with 3 years left in Bush's term, the Democrats are coming out and they're going, I told you so, we need to get somebody that's going to be a good candidate to run against whatever Republican they put up there, because George Bush cannot run again.
That's right. Now, this is his second term, right?
Yes. Presidents here in the United States are only allowed 2 terms.
Now, how did he get in the second go?
John, I think it had a lot to do, we can question the fractions of the people who weren't allowed to vote and, that sort of conspiracy theory kind of stuff. But I think in general, it's always in the favor of the incumbent because people don't want to make change, even though change would be better. People are more concerned about going, well, let's give them another chance. I don't want to make a change here in midstream. I don't want to change horses midstream. And even though the place is going down the tubes, but then you vote him in, and he's got 4 years to bring the country down to the worst state it's been in almost the history of this country.
Now, this is really bizarre because normally a president, from fairly traditionally a president's second term, he spends becoming a statesman. But we haven't seen a lot of that this term.
He's an idiot. A while ago when he was talking about the avian flu, I was almost waiting for him to say, I have experience with the avian flu because I used to fly in the National Guard. That's how stupid he is.
Yeah,
and I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah.
The guy is really stupid. There was a thing a few weeks ago where he's doing a press conference, and he immediately, after he finished his speech, he immediately says, well, I'll take a question from, and I forget what the woman's name, Bernadette or something like that, but there was a plant in the audience that wasn't there. And he said, okay, I'll take a question from Bernadette. There's no Bernadette here? Well, I'm sorry. Okay, well, so it was an obvious plant which has happened to him before, where the Republicans had planted a phony news person, a guy named Jeff Gannon, who actually was a male prostitute, that they had incorporated into the White House press pool to throw out these puffball questions to him that he could support his agenda. And he got burned on that, and he still does it. I mean, his handlers are probably the worst culprits in this whole
I'm getting
thing.
a drift here, Richard. I'm guessing you're not a fan of George W. Bush.
I'm a fan of the system. That's why I'm so jacked up about watching the procedure. But no, I'm not a fan of him at all. And according to his ratings, he is below, last time I looked, he's like 38 or 35% approval rating.
Now,
that's awful.
Is there someone in his party that you believed would have made a better president?
In the Republican Party,
Uh-huh.
John McCain was a front runner. John McCain is a Vietnam veteran. He's very bipartisan. His name was out there. It was toyed around that he might even be asked to be vice president. But in all honesty, no, I haven't seen any. Some of the front runners have been indicted for fraud and for corruption. Bill Frist, Tom DeLay.
Mm-hmm.
So his administration is full of criminals.
My goodness. Now, Richard, something that's interesting to me is the space race. You know, the fact that we're hearing stories now that man will go walk on the moon again, and maybe even they'll put a woman on the moon, and we might even have people walking on Mars. How much of that is interesting to the average American, do you think?
The average American really could care less about that. All Americans care about now is being able to put food on their table and get a decent wage. Health care, the gas crisis. No, it's not important. And unfortunately, for all the work that NASA has done the past 40 years, it's unfortunate that should now be not considered at all. That should be totally separate from anything else. I think a lot of people would be more in favor of NASA getting private funding, and you're seeing that on a small scale happening. But as far as NASA being a government agency, if it folded up tomorrow, I don't think America would care at all. That's how desperate things are over here.
Yeah, you could well imagine that, wouldn't you? It seems surprising, though, with all the changes that NASA has made through the years. Do you think it's likely that if it did close up, Americans really would just say, well, that live on the memory rather than where it's at the moment?
Yes, John, I think they would, because we haven't seen a return on the investment that NASA has made. It's one thing to say, well, the microwave oven or certain technology
Velcro
has come from that. Who cares? Velcro may have been used in the space program, but would it have been invented or not if the space program didn't exist? It's an intangible. Done. It's history. And again, unfortunately, I think most Americans would say, well, too bad. We'll send our kids over to Russia if they're going to continue their space program, or Japan or China, and collaborate with them rather than us doing it ourselves.
Sure. You know, I was looking at the space shuttle flying back in one of the news report from some time ago, and it really made me wonder why they bothered, or why you guys even bothered building a shuttle. Because the thing is, it blasts off as a rocket. Sure, it flies down, but surely the only thing you're saving is the fact that it flies down rather than using parachutes.
Mm-hmm.
And the way technology advances, you'd almost think it'd be better to build something new each time and make use of current technology rather than... Because, I mean, we've got technology in there from the 70s or 80s.
The technology is so far behind. When I was a kid growing up in the 50s and 60s, the things that we were told, I mean, I was told I'd be going to school in rocket belts in the late 60s
Yeah,
and
whatever
70s.
happened to that?
Never happened. Never happened. I mean, I don't
still ride my bicycle. I'm pretty annoyed about that.
Yeah.
Where's
I
my
mean,
rocket belt?
all the technology that was supposed to be given to the military, where there'd be so few foot soldiers and everything would be robotics, it never happened. Never. I can't explain it. I don't know if it had to do with the lack of technology or the lack of workers, or I don't know. But it's such a moot point now when you're just trying to live hand to mouth, particularly with fuel prices going up. I live here in northeast New England, which is, you were speaking with a gentleman in Wisconsin. We share the same weather pattern. That Arctic Express that blows across Lake Superior goes right across state New York and into Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Maine. We get all that. So now they're talking about 30, 50, 60 50% increases in natural gas prices and oil prices this winter. People are going to be freezing to death.
And how is America with, when we're talking about electric cars, maybe solar, wind power, these sorts of things, how are they with these
Not at all.
resources?
When Jimmy Carter was president, he put solar panels on the White House. The first thing that Ronald Reagan did, the Republican president did, when he took office, was to remove those solar panels.
You are kidding.
So first thing he did. So solar power...
Took them off?
Took them off.
For what reason?
Because
Aesthetics?
it's not a viable fuel source. This country was built on the auto manufacturers in Detroit. They were built on the internal combustion engine, and we're not about to change. We're not doing this wacky, radical space-age technology, this unproven technology. We're going to stick with what we have. And by God, if we need to attack a country and get their oil, we'll do it, rather than go to solar power. There are very few cars here in America. The Toyota Prius, Honda has a car that are doing quite well. Some of the SUVs are now hybrids, but it's a gas-electric kind of hybrid. Even biodiesel is not taking off. You just have a handful of people that are saying, look, we have the technology. Hydrogen-powered vehicles, they just won't do it because it's easier. It's easier to maintain the status quo and starve to death, so it's easier that way.
It seems very foolish to me.
Oh, John, I'll be over next week, okay, pal?
Right.
Set up the bunk and...
I'll put the kettle on. Hey, do you know, that's something you can't buy in the States. A kettle.
A kettle?
Yeah, do you know what a kettle is?
A tea kettle?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can buy a tea kettle here.
No, you cannot.
Absolutely.
No, you can buy a Mr. Coffee and you can buy a Mr. Tea, but you can't buy a kettle.
Absolutely. Well, no, I have a kettle here. Whatever you have in Australia.
An electric kettle?
Yes.
You plug it into the power point, you turn it on, and it boils the water?
Absolutely.
You cannot.
John, I'll send you a kettle.
I looked high and low the last time I was in the States, and I did not see a kettle.
You go to Target or Walmart or any of those places, you can find it.
You better not be messing with me.
Do you want me to send you one?
No, I've got one. I think I'll have to take your word for it. Richard, hey, thanks for persevering with the phone details. And shall we talk again?
We'll do it, John. Anytime, brother. Thank you so much for calling.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Richard.